Hello and welcome to UPlift Black. We are working to increase the visibility of Black people living outside the urban centers in Canada. Some of us small community Blacks have some very different experiences, and this show is designed to help tell the stories of what it's like to be Black in a smaller, rural community. We have Teneshia. Hi, Teneshia. How are you? With us
I'm
today,
great.
Teneshia
How are you
Samuel.
doing today?
Good. Teneshia,
Hi
you
there. Good afternoon,
are
Shelly.
based out of Peel region. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, and you're an
Born and raised in
entrepreneur.
Mississauga.
Absolutely. You're an entrepreneur. You wear many hats, it seems. I follow you on social media. So tell us a little bit about what it's like to be Teneishia in Brampton.
Absolutely. So, born and raised in Mississauga, actually, Mississauga proud. I've been here my whole life, over 40 years. Oh my God, I almost said 40 years. I'm only 30 something. We're not there yet. I'm getting ahead of
Almost.
myself. No shade at anyone who is actually over 40, but
That's right.
born and raised as a millennial in Peel region, based in Mississauga. I myself am, as you mentioned, I do wear quite a few hats. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a social entrepreneur, and so I've sort of started scoping out business space in different areas. I'm an interdisciplinarian at heart, especially when it comes to the arts and healing and healthcare. And so I've sort of found ways in my own life to sort of follow, what's intuitive to me and what matters to me, what I value. And a lot of that involves intersectional justice work and healthcare. And so right now at this time, I'm spending quite a bit of my time as a community counselor working in mental health, specifically with the LGBTQ community. I do gender therapies, somatic therapies, talk therapy, all that good stuff. And I also work with the nonprofit sector as well, specifically Black Women in Motion, based out of Toronto, and Moyo Health and Community Services, which is formerly known as Peel HIV/AIDS Network. So I've got my hands in a lot of cookie jars, so to speak, right now. I'm also a creative, I'm a musician, I'm an artist, and so I've got a lot of projects on the go that keep me busy. But the center of what I do is very much philanthropy based, it's entrepreneurial based, and community development based. So that's where my heart is right now, and that's what's really keeping me busy in terms of my day-to-day projects.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's many hats and many great things that you're involved in. What kind of brought you to the place of being involved in the not-for-profit work and mental health in particular to the 2S LGBTQ plus community?
Sure, absolutely. A great deal of it is, it's very much tied to my own story in coming out and growing up and becoming secure in my own voice. I actually started my career in the corporate world in banking. You never guess that such a creative person such as myself would, end up in corporate, national office banking in downtown Toronto. But that's where I started. That's where a lot of my business chops were busted, and I learned a lot about business and relationship building, stakeholdering, and networking, and all that good stuff that really helps me now as an artist and in the non-for-profit sector. But that's how I started my career, and just being a person of color, being someone who is also a person with disabilities, a person who is queer identified, I definitely came across several challenges, so to speak, when being that kind of marginalized person who is typically not included in the culture or the language of an organization and company. And so I guess a lot of reflection throughout my career in the corporate world has led me to starting to find ways to live more authentically and feel more free to be myself. And it's actually in my last stint at a bank, which shall remain nameless, I was a part of their national pride campaign. And so I was plastered all over, bank marketing wraparounds and branch wraparounds with quotes and statements from myself during Pride. That was about 2 years ago. And when I was asked, what does Pride mean to me? And I thought to myself, well, it's really about freedom. It's about being authentic. And it's famous last words, my last year at the bank. And I left the corporate world and I ended up taking those skills into the non-for-profit world. I specialized in recruitment and selection, HR, functions. And so I've sort of given those skills back into the non-for-profit industry for smaller organizations that don't always have the skills needed in order to boost their business functioning, their operations, right? And so I've done a lot of diversity and inclusion, hiring, policy analysis. So I really had a chance to just learn and explore in different areas of nonprofit using the skills that I gained in banking to serve and give back to my community, especially the Black community, especially the LGBTQ community, and really devote those energies to projects that are close to my heart. Right now, specifically, I'm with Black Women in Motion. My official job title is a digital content strategist, but really, we play a lot of roles, especially in a small organization. And so, a lot of the skills that I've learned in the corporate world, I'm putting into fundraising right now and networking and building our brand presence. And so, it's just been such a great honor to really take my own experience, a little bit of struggle, a little bit of adversity, and sort of transform that into something that breathes some fresh new life into the nonprofit industry. And sometimes, we don't always get those kinds of skills and experience when working in the social justice cause. So that's how I pretty much landed where I am at this time.
That's perfect. It's funny that you say that you started off in the banking industry. I also started off in the banking industry, and before I was an activist, and and a lot of my skill sets that I've learned to be part of, like to be a founder and president of this organization, Uplift Black, has stemmed from what I learned in banking. So customer service is usually a very important part of banking. I know that you probably understand that. But what was your experiences working in a bank, you're non-binary, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
When you were working at the bank, were you out as non-binary? Were you using they, them pronouns then? What was that experience like for you?
Absolutely. So at the time, I was actually not out as non-binary. I was out as queer, but not non-binary. I felt, you kind of have to pick your battles, especially when you've got other aspects of intersectionality around you when you're in a very white-dominated cis-het male space. And so I wasn't completely out, not only to my workplace, but also myself. And my community as well. And so I was in a period of self-discovery at the time, doing a lot of questioning and a lot of, handling and working with just the ability to stay true to my own self. And so, I had left the industry, unfortunately, not being able to be as authentic as I had originally wanted to. But now that I'm in a brand new industry, such as a nonprofit, I feel a lot more less constrained, so to speak, I guess, with the individuals that I work with, who are generally focused and very mandated on being feminist, being anti-oppressive, anti-racist. Those are the values of this kind of industry I've noticed that are quite championed and very intentionally um, you know, acted upon. Whereas I found in the corporate world, the diversity inclusion initiatives weren't as, I guess, long-standing or culturally integrated. Especially in banking, especially in the national office environments. I was working in headquarter offices, with some pretty influential divisions of the bank, and just finding it being very, white, very heterosexual, very cisgendered. It is very difficult to be completely authentic and true to yourself, especially when you're met by day-to-day microaggressions and comments from, just the old boys club culture that you get, in banking, especially in, the C-suite level offices, So, at the time, it wasn't an environment that was, but I felt safe. to come out to my coworkers, but now that I've sort of moved my career in the direction of entrepreneurship and philanthropy and service, I've been finding that I've been doing even more so of a service to myself by living more authentically and being out and using they them pronouns. It's still something that I'm working with. It's a process, and it's so funny, just kind of coming into myself as a person who is non-binary. It's something that I've always questioned throughout my entire life until this point in time, especially over the past several years, when I realized, it's okay to explore. It's okay to have that inquiry into your own personal identity. And so a lot of my work, professionally, is very much political and personal as well. So that's sort of how I've devoted my energies into living the most authentic life I can possibly create for myself. So the social justice realm, the not-for-profit realm, is very much almost a personal project of my own, coming into my full authentic voice, I'd say, as a human on this planet. So out and proud, they them pronouns, them being, as I would call.
I like it.
That's sort of the identities that I choose for myself. But I'm always in motion, always in fluidity, and I can't say that I will use the same pronouns in the next 10 years. I find that gender identity is something that is constantly in fluid motion. But as it stands right now, they, them, and proud of it, and very confident in where I stand right now in my personal identity.
So you were talking about pride. So you're feeling pride within yourself, both for being Black and for being queer and non-binary. So it's like a little bit of all in one right now. Would that be your experience?
Oh, absolutely. Intersectionality is just, like, it's just so integral to what drives me, it gives me momentum in the work that I do. If if one person isn't free, we're not all free, and
Exactly.
that is something that's been very close to my heart. And I find that as an intersectional person, a person who is Black, a person who is queer, non-binary, someone who is visually impaired, hearing impaired, like, there's so
Check all
many
the boxes.
things
I like
that
it.
have put up barriers um, throughout my entire life. And I find that in some way, some aspect of the injustices that many people face affects me in some way. And so I pretty much try to push the notion whenever I interact and engage with the business partners I work with, and trying to influence them in their consciousness of intersectional inclusivity. I help them to really just get to understand that every social injustice, every barrier, every lack of access is something that actually directly affects you, even if it's not something that you notice, outright, or that you feel in the immediate present moment. And so, yeah, intersectional justice is very close to my heart. It's something that was inspired in me by one of my favorite authors, Audre Lorde, and she's one of the feminist trailblazers who really championed the notion of intersecting all of our struggles, all of our sufferings together as one collective humanity, so that we experience that ideal freedom that we're also capable of. So that's
I,
that's sort of my experience in terms of
I agree.
intersectionality and how it impacts my day-to-day interactions. I like to think, almost everything affects me in some way. I'll have something to say about a lot of things, and how a lot of injustices are interconnected,
Absolutely. Now, with
so to
your
speak, when
HR
we talk
work,
about it.
sorry, with your HR work
Absolutely.
that you did, diversity and inclusion, I think that is so important to have somebody with your experiences holding that position. One of the things that I've come across a lot when dealing with corporate, when dealing with institutions, is a lot of the people that hold that positions are typically white, and it's been a struggle to as I've navigated working with, the police services and working with the municipalities who are all trying to tackle anti-Black racism and looking for some sort of guidance on how to do that. One of the things that keeps coming up is that everybody that's holding those roles are cisgendered and white, and it makes it really, really difficult. And I know that typically, I think they kind of assume that if you're like a gay or lesbian and you're white, then you're a perfect person for that role. But we
Yeah.
also know that within the queer community, a lot of anti-Black racism and racism in general exists, even within the queer community. And then let's not forget, the heteronormative expectations that exist within the world. Also, there's a lot of people who believe that, cisgender is the way to go, and they don't necessarily agree with, people who don't conform to that. So I do applaud you for being involved in that work. But one of the things that also brought to my attention was the idea that you're an entrepreneur. A lot of people who are queer, who are racialized, who are disabled, or with an impairment, like they typically get into these entrepreneurship roles in order to just pay themselves, because they struggle to obtain work where they can feel safe, where they can feel they can live their authentic selves. So typically they tend to create work for themselves. What do you think about that in terms of what you do now versus what you did before within the bank?
Absolutely. I mean, entrepreneurship, I mean, everyone sort of approaches it from a different set of eyes, a different point of view. And I think the reason why I decided to choose that route rather than work within a set structure or organization is just because I I hate the idea of putting limits on myself. I have to say that, like, I grew, I'm visually impaired. I'm legally blind. I have 10% vision. But if you ask my mother, I'm probably the most stubborn child. You can never tell me what I can't do. Like, even if you told me, and they did repeatedly, you have 10% vision. Like, how can you expect to see the world? And yet, I would say, darn it, no, I'm going to do what I'm free. I can do whatever I want to do. And so there's always been this I guess, level of tenacity that's always wanted me to, or that's always propelled me to sort of push the borders, push the boundaries. And so staying within one organization or the corporate world is something that made me feel a little caged. So to speak, and not necessarily. I know I could have made a very comfortable life for myself working corporate. I mean, being an ambitious person, type A, ladder climbing. I'm sure I could do that, but at the end of the day, I like to see myself learning and growing and meeting new people, meeting new networks. I like to have a global perspective, and I like the ability to expand on my skills and my networks. And so that's sort of why I've chosen, the entrepreneurial aspect. And I like the aspect of service and influence. When I look at why I'm an entrepreneur and the things that I see entrepreneurs having in terms of an impact in the world, it's how they lead thought, how they impact consciousness, how they change the direction of how humans actually develop and evolve. And so I sort of see myself as sort of fitting into the fabric of that kind of movement of consciousness and helping to bring humans to a point where they can perform at their best and expand and grow and evolve. And so that's sort of my own personal motivations for being an entrepreneur. But I can also see, having so many identities that intersect with one another, how it seems as though if I'm going to make it anyway in this world, I'm going to have to make my own way. That's a custom fit job because, what organization is going to be a perfect fit for someone who, has so many, I'm not going to say needs, but just so many things that require so many aspects of consciousness from day one, needing accommodations on the job in order to be successful, to and like to have my pronouns changed on my employee profile, and the whole process of that, and just the all the advocacy that would be required. That's a job in itself, forget the job you're actually hired for. So I can definitely see why a lot of folks, who are experiencing intersecting identities would choose to create something for themselves. But I think, more so for me, my path was sort of carved out by the values that sort of drive me as a person, and not necessarily the limitations of my body or my experience. It was more so of a spiritual direction for me, I guess, if I were to put it in those kinds of terms.
Love it. Now, you talked about spirituality. Talk to me about how important that is to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do consider myself a spiritual person. I did grow up in the church, evangelical Christian, born again, the full gamut, like baptized, everything. Very conservative, actually. My first career, I was actually a biblical scholar. Um, I'd studied up to the master's level in biblical translation and research, and I thought I would become a pastor or preacher or something like that, or a scholar, working academic. I still am, but not in the capacity I used to be. But I noticed a lot of things in church fellowship that were not inclusive to my experience as a person, as especially as a young person growing up, questioning not only my sexual identity, growing up in a as a pubescent human, but also my gender identity and how I fit in terms of social relationships. And there was so many things that I had noticed in myself that were sort of suppressed or repressed by the culture, that was sort of championed by the spiritual groups that I was a part of at the time, especially on university campuses. I was a minister at a time when I was an undergraduate, and I did a lot of work with the LGBTQ community because I myself at the time was out and identified within the community. But I actually was ostracized for the work that I did, just because I chose to be, a person of faith, but also someone who broke bread, drank wine with um, with folks like Jesus did, basically. So yeah, I had I'll tell you a story. It was actually an undergraduate, and I had just come out at the time, and came out to her, and she was one of my closest friends, actually, in this church. And the relationship actually ended at that point when she basically said to me, um, you know, it's sinful who you are, basically, and the only ideal there is in this life is heterosexual, cisgendered constructs of society. And so I had definitely had a bit of a falling out with the Christian church personally, and so it's sort of thrown me on a quest for my own understanding of what spirituality is. I did my own search or quest for God, so to speak, and took off to the east, actually. And this is around the same time I left the bank. I took off to Thailand, studied Buddhist meditation, Vipassana, Theravada Buddhism, did the whole thing, my own, like, eat, pray, love, but like black version, except like a black person in Thailand. And I was like the only person of color, in those spiritual communities, those yoga communities. And so that's like a whole other
Conversation. It's a whole other
conversation.
conversation, isn't it?
Whole lack of diversity in the spiritual yoga, the Buddhist community. But I kind of fell into that crowd, and sort of the language spoke to me, basically, language of non-judgment, and of service, and of equality, and of our oneness. And I became a yoga teacher. I started practicing meditation in the rice fields of Thailand with my teacher. She's a nun, and I stay in contact with her quite often. And I definitely fell into a group of some radical black Buddhist yogis who are definitely into a practice of challenging dharmic spiritual practices that have sort of come over into the West, and challenging the spaces that have been rendered so exclusive of people of color, or the LGBTQ community, of people with disabilities. And so, it's been quite a journey for myself, and just sort of unifying all of those things that I find valuable: business and service and oneness and development of humanity, the path, the journey of self-actualization. Those have all sort of blended and melded together into my entrepreneurial path. And so it's also very much connected for me. So even to say, like, to be a business person is to be a spiritual person, and vice versa. So using those languages, using those terms are also very, very similar to me. And that's just my personal experience. It's not the same for everyone, but that's sort of been my journey up until this point.
Yeah, it's a beautiful experience, and the journey that you're taking to love yourself, and I think that's so important. Self-care, self-love, especially when you're doing any kind of like activist work out there, right? It's really before, like, I know that I've done work for many, many years, activism work, and I think that it's only now that I feel confident in working with anti-Black racism, because I had a lot of my own biases that I needed to work through, and to become the person that I am today, and to love myself more as a Black woman. And one of the things that actually I found, that growing up in Brampton, I was fine being Black. I mean, I actually loved being Black. It's kind of when I left
Yeah.
Brampton that it became a little bit harder, getting into the corporate world, needing to have professional hair, so them, encouraging me to constantly straighten my hair, because it looked more professional for me. Dressing a certain way, that was palatable for them, speaking a certain way, that was really. So I started to now question everything about my existence and the way I looked, and then also, questioning my sexuality, and going through that journey. But one thing that it was very difficult for me growing up in Brampton was being, a queer girl. Being, somebody who wasn't, heterosexual and had interest in women. So I'm asking, now that you're in Brampton, and this is, I'm talking 20 years ago for me, what's it like now? Is there a queer community in Brampton, and do you feel represented in that community?
Yeah, so there is a queer community in Peel region. It's small, but it is there. We do have a small, thriving group of queer, trans, BIPOC individuals. A smaller group, younger group. I find that tends to be the more diverse and inclusive of the groups. In the suburbs here, the other LGBT groups I've found across Peel region have been a little bit more white dominated, and there's been a little more of a lack of diversity. So I tend to sort of keep to the groups that are more inclusive. But there's definitely a lot more spaces these days as opposed to 20 years ago, because I've been here all this time, and there has been some change in terms of spaces and activity, and even activist groups that have come up and started hosting safe spaces and workshops for raising consciousness and taking care of the LGBTQ community. Because at the end of the day, this is the most diverse municipality in the world per capita. So naturally, you're going to have a very diverse community and LGBTQ community as well. So there's no reason why all of those who are Black, also people of color, can sort of band together and support one another, and to build their own community, and also challenge other spaces that are typically dominated by white gay men. But let's be real, this is generally how it's been. But it's there has been progress, there has been movement in terms of leadership and influence of BIPOC people in the LGBTQ community here in Peel region. So there's change happening, not as much as I'd like to see, or many of us would like to see. It's still a small, strong group of us, but I think there's still a lot more of an impact that we can have.
Absolutely, and you're doing great work out there. Like I said, I follow you, and I'm excited to just see, what you're involved in. And thank you for being brave, and for taking up space I really appreciate it. And so I've got a few questions for you. They're like kind of like speed round fun questions that I ask everybody
Here
who's
we
on the
go.
show. So one of them is, what is your favorite drink, alcoholic or non-alcoholic?
Oh my goodness. So I don't really drink much anymore, but I'd have to say gin and tonic.
A gin and tonic, GT. Love it.
Yes, very much
It's one of those things, gin, you love it or you hate it, right?
so. No, love it.
Perfect.
Give it to me.
Exactly. It's a summer drink for me for sure. Now, what would be your favorite childhood TV show if you ever watched TV?
Oh, Art Attack on
Art Attack.
TVO. They used to air it with Neil Buchanan.
Yeah,
Hands down. Still my
nice.
favorite show.
That's fun. Artist, I love it. Movies that make you cry, or a movie that has made you cry recently, or that every time you see it, you can watch it again and again and you still cry at the same scene.
Oh gosh. Black Panther, which I saw 5 times and still cried five. Like
Did you?
each time I
What scene did
cried.
you cry at?
All of them because I was
All
just
of
so
them.
happy it all happened. Like just
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
concept
it's
of the
like
movie and
it's like sad, like that we waited so long, yet so exciting and so
yeah,
powerful at the same time. Yeah.
it was a fulfilling
Yeah.
cry.
A lot of emotions for sure. All right. Person that you look up to, that inspires
Oh,
you.
there's so many. I mean, I
Yeah.
am a person who deeply believes in mentorship, and so I've got quite a
Mhm.
few mentors all over the world. I mean, I've got other friends who are entrepreneurs in Peel region. Deepa Mahanti, she's a filmmaker. Salima Kasimlaka, she's also an entrepreneur based in Mississauga in the yoga industry. I also have another favorite mentor. Her name is Bridget Schottenbacher, and she's actually a Buddhist nun based in Thailand. So, I mean, I've got folks sort of all around the
Yeah.
world who I try to sort of model my life after and who sort of vibe with me in terms of the values that we share in terms of service and developing humanity. So, those are the individuals that I tend to look up to. I also am a huge fan of some of the radical Black Buddhist yogis in the US, Angel Kyoto Williams, Lama Rod Owens. They're definitely shaking up space in the spiritual communities and sort of challenging the dominant notions of, you know, of how we even present ourselves and how we show up to community space in our language and challenge how we are excluding people based on our language. So many people that I really look up to. Anyways, next question. Continue. I know it's a speed round.
No, I love it. I love it. It's good because it gives us an idea of, like, when people say who their role models are or the people that they look up to, it really speaks to who they are as people, right? And what influences them. So thank you so much for sharing that. You spoke a little bit about some radical people doing some really cool things, and every episode I talk a little bit about a book that really inspires me, and that should be read or listen to if you have an audiobook.
Yes, please.
This one here is The Skin We're In by Desmond Cole. Desmond Cole is located out of Toronto, Ontario, a writer, journalist, turned activist, and speaks a lot about the Toronto Police Service and anti-Black racism that exists within that community. It's a great book to read, just to find out a little bit about what it's like to be Black in Toronto. So that is one of my recommendations. Have you had a chance to read it at all yet yourself?
I haven't personally read it, but it's definitely in circulation. I've
Yeah.
seen the title around. I am familiar with Desmond Cole. I'm familiar
Mhm.
with his writing, and so the
Yeah,
experience I'm sure he's shared in the book is definitely not something that is outside of my experience. Also being from the
absolutely.
GTA, but I am familiar with the book. Personally, have not read it yet, but don't worry, Desmond, I will read it. I promise.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, hopefully you'll get a chance to check it out. So very final last question before we let you go. I also ask
Sure.
everybody on the show this one question. What's really important with Uplift Black is that we create change in our community. And one of the things I want to ask you is, what is your call for change? What would you like to see within your community that would really speak to the work that you're doing?
Mhm. Absolutely. My call to action right now is really to have people come together into one inclusive space so that we can share experiences and tell our stories. I believe that a lot of change and movement can happen when we each use our unique voices, if we listen to each other and sort of negotiate space and language around our experience. A lot of movement can happen. That could be in business, that could be socially, that could be justice wise. I think a lot of movement and change can happen when we just look at how we show up to the table when we interact with the people around us. So my call to action, I'd say, would um, be aware, be cognizant of how you enter every conversation that you are engaged with throughout your day to day life. How does that show your values, your service to your vision, and how you just personally show up in your own true self. So that's sort of the challenge I always put out to the people I speak to when I go out on gigs. Be cognizant and aware of where you are in the present moment, and allow that to influence how you show up when you speak to the other person in front of you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, if our audience wants to find out more about Teneshia Samuel, how do we find you?
You can contact me through Black Women in Motion. My email address is Teneishia at blackwomeninmotion.org. Check us out. Check out our website, blackwomeninmotion.org. We've got a love offering campaign that is spreading awareness of food insecurity amongst Black families in the Greater Toronto area. So if anyone is interested in supporting that program, definitely head on over there and give us a shout, and we can certainly provide you with any more information that you would need. Yeah, you can contact me at Black Women in Motion.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sharing. I hope that we continue to work together and inspire each other and do some really cool stuff in the community and shake things up a little bit and make change. So thank you very much for tuning in. Sorry, I cut you off.
Thanks so much, Shelly. No worries. There's a bit of a delay, so I have to work with that.
I know.
Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to our current episode with Teneshia Samuel. Remember, our motto with Uplift Black is to share, support, and show up. So we hope you do that. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again soon.